Welcome to Talking Pictures. My name is Christian Genzel. I'm a filmmaker and film journalist from Salzburg, Austria. Talking Pictures is a podcast series in which I talk to the people who made some of my favorite movies. Today's guest is screenwriter Dave Callaham, and our conversation revolves around one of his early screenwriting assignments, the adaptation of the influential video game Doom by id Software, turned into an action movie starring The Rock in 2005. Dave quickly became an in-demand writer in Hollywood, and his credits include a ton of high-profile action movies and blockbusters. He wrote the initial script of what would then become Sylvester Stallone's The Expendables. He worked on films like Godzilla and Zombieland Double Tap. He was a screenwriter on big comic book movies like Wonder Woman 1984, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. And apart from that, he was the creator of the Amazon series Jean-Claude Van Johnson and the writer and producer of a satirical animation film, America the Movie. Our interview, however, focuses on Doom. Dave talks about the aspects of the game which he wanted to bring to the screen and about some of the changes that were made. He also discusses the film's legacy and his collaboration with original director Enda McCallion, who was replaced by Andrzej Bartkowiak during pre-production. And he talks about his work on another video game adaptation, the 2021 action film Mortal Kombat. Please note that the connection during our interview was a bit shaky, so the sound quality may be a bit wobbly at some points during the interview, but you won't have any problems following our conversation. My interview with Dave Callaham was conducted in connection with our German language podcast Lichtspielplatz. So, if you speak German, please visit lichtspielplatz.at and check out episode number 71, which features an in-depth discussion of the two Doom movies. Also, make sure to listen to my conversation with original Doom director Enda McCallion and my interview with Tony Giglio, the writer and director of the second Doom movie, Doom Annihilation. If you enjoy my interviews here on Talking Pictures, please consider heading over to patreon.com/talkingpicturespodcast and supporting the production of new episodes. And make sure to check out our other interviews on our website, talkingpicturespodcast.com. So without any further ado, here is screenwriter Dave Callaham.
Doom is the first movie I was ever hired to write on. I moved out to Los Angeles in 1999 to try to become a screenwriter. I got very lucky and also worked very hard and broke in within several years and sold my first script somewhere around 2002, 2003. I don't remember exactly. Unfortunately, my memory for a lot of this stuff is going to be a little hazy. And the first meeting I had written the script. I had gotten representation by way of the script. I signed with an agency, management. I'm sure your listeners know how that all works. And they were interested, of course, in selling that script, but obviously their goal is to build a career beyond one project. And so they immediately set me up with a series of meetings to sort of introduce me to all the executives and producers around town. And the very first meeting I took was with Lorenzo de Bonaventura, who several weeks previous to this meeting had been basically running Warner Brothers and had exited the company and had been allowed to take several of the projects that Warner Brothers was developing with him as a producer. So they would still be the studio, but he would be attached as a producer to those movies. I remember every moment of this. We met at a restaurant bar in Beverly Hills. I was scared out of my mind. Already at that point, he was a very famous, legendary figure inside of Hollywood. He developed The Matrix and all these other great movies at Warner Brothers. And we sat down, and he's a rather imposing fellow, I would say. And I say that with love. He's the best, but I was just very intimidated, and he asked me some questions about myself and asked me what I wanted to do. And I didn't really know how to answer any of those questions yet. I hadn't had any experience taking meetings or knowing how to sort of advocate on behalf of myself as a writer. And at some point he said, "Do you play video games?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Do you know what Doom is?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Do you want to write a movie for Doom?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "Great. You don't have to tell me anything now. I'm going to set a meeting, and you're going to come in and you're going to pitch to a bunch of people at Warner Brothers." And I said, great. And he set a meeting for maybe a couple of weeks out. I don't remember. And I did not know what a pitch was. I didn't know who the people in the meeting were going to be. I've never gone into anything greener in my life. And ultimately, I do think that that helped me a lot because I really didn't have a lot of nerves going into this process because I was just so unsure of what was going to happen. If I knew now what I knew then, I would know to be more scared. But I was. And so I went in and I pitched in a room that turned out to be Lorenzo and a bunch of execs from Warner Brothers, including Greg Silverman and John Wells, who was also a producer on the film. For your listeners, if they don't know, John Wells is an incredibly legendary television writer and producer. He made ER and The West Wing and China Beach. He, I believe, was the president of the Writers Guild at one point. And I had no idea who he was when I walked into that room. So I just sort of told a story about what I thought Doom could be. And they basically hired me in the room, which I now recognize as almost impossible. It's doesn't happen very often. Not quite in the room. I left and then they talked about it. But by the time I got back to my job, I was still working as a receptionist. My agents had already been told that I had gotten the job. So
wow.
I thought, wow, Hollywood's so easy. This is the best. This is gonna be how it is every time. And then,
why does everyone tell me that it's so hard to get into Hollywood, right?
Yeah. Literally never happened to me again. And I've been fighting and clawing ever since. I didn't know how good I had it, but that is how I was hired on Doom.
So you said you were familiar with the game. How familiar were you? Were you an avid player of the game?
I would say, if I'm being honest, probably middle of the road in terms of, all the way from somebody who's never heard of it or has only heard of it but never played to, somebody who's really, really obsessed with it. I was middle of the road. I'd played it when I was younger. I had very strong memories of it, but I couldn't tell you specifics of the levels or of the lore or name all of the different items or demons. I've always been more of a hobby gamer than anything else. I've never found myself particularly down a rabbit hole of any one game other than like a Star Wars Battlefront. But other than that, no. So I was vaguely familiar and remembered it pretty well. And I had a pretty strong opinion when Lorenzo asked that Doom for me was more of a feeling than a specific story, because obviously some of the original games are more about the experience you're having as the player. You are the main character, which by nature removes some of the storytelling because it allows you to do the storytelling. So for me, my big idea was, and this is not a big idea, I'm no genius, but I just said I think that the game is really scary. The game, I remember the game is scaring the shit out of me. And that was a pretty strong effect when I was young, especially when I was playing it on a screen that was, probably no larger than a paperback book, and in my parents' basement, which was not a scary environment, and yet this game still managed to pull me in with this sense of dread and this sense that anything could be around the corner. So that's really what I wanted to capture with the movie.
So did you go back to the game to look for specific elements that you wanted to bring into the movie?
Sure. We had really great access to the people at id also. So I don't think I actually played the game again, because at that point, I might be wrong about some of this, but I remember it as being harder to access emulators and different, video game systems at that moment. Now I could do anything I wanted instantly online, but at the time everything was pretty fledgling. And that's my memory of it, at least. Maybe I just didn't know how to access stuff. But I remember watching a lot of clips of the game and reading a lot about the game, looking at pictures. And then once I had access to the people at id, then I could get my hands on, level maps and all the different art that they had worked on across the games for the different demons and the different designs. And so that really became my resource in terms of reference material. But obviously we were also a new story. So I was really using that for a checklist of characters, of demons, of things that, like you do anytime you adapt anything, you just sort of say, okay, well, what's the stuff that has to get into here? What is the BFG and some of the more specific demons? Those are the things I was looking for.
So comparing that initial pitch and the initial draft that you were working on with the finished movie, what's the journey? What kind of changes did happen on the way to that?
Gosh, I will say I have not reread anything I've written on that movie for 20 years, so I can't say specifically. I didn't really know how to write a studio level movie at that point, and so I would suspect if I were to reread it, it would be structurally pretty unsound. I remember at least in my head, the script that I wrote didn't feel quite as claustrophobic as the movie, and that's probably better in the final product. I think Doom should feel claustrophobic. There was quite a bit of backstory that I was attempting to retcon that ended up not in the movie, that we experimented with. The process was that after I wrote, there were a number of other subsequent writers, which is pretty typical for this sort of project. And I came back after a period. So there was me, Wesley, who is the other writer who's credited on the movie, a great legendary writer in his own right, who I learned so much from. The Butterworth brothers, who are also much better writers than I am. So a number of people worked on the film, resulted in a final product that I would say bears probably the same structure as what I started with. There's the moment in the movie, as just an example, when the character Destroyer, a very original name that I did come up with, ends up in sort of an electrified pit where the walls are electrified, and he ends up fighting a demon there. That was an idea I had from the get-go, because I'm very into professional wrestling. And I was thinking about electric cage matches as inspiration. And the first-person shooter sequence, interestingly, is the only part of the movie, I think, that is almost verbatim what I wrote on the page in the first draft. I wrote that knowing we were going to have to do it. And usually when you write action like that, you're just kind of giving an idea so that a coordinator can come in and build out the stunts and stuff. But the way that I wrote that, in terms of this many steps out of corridor, you turn around, you turn to the left, there's something there, you jump up, whatever it is exactly how they designed it. And so that's pretty cool. So, I guess the answer is, overall, the big structure of the movie, the brother and sister relationship, Sarge, the Rock's character, turning out to kind of break bad by the end of the movie, all of that stuff was in my scripts, but a lot of the touches and the character work and changes made along the way did happen.
Now, one of the changes from the game to the movie, and I know this is more of a detailed question, but in the game, the creatures are really hell creatures. They're like demons from hell, and there is no real explanation behind them. Whereas in the movie, you have a whole backstory of genetics and, the Martian chromosome and genetic experiments and that sort of thing. Was there any discussion about, choosing that or going from a different kind of background to that in the movie?
Yeah, that was all my fault or my idea, depending on how you look at it. Again, at the time, my thought was that the game was pretty thin on story, and the idea, there had been a couple of other movies around that decade involving demons and portals from hell, things like that. And so I thought, well, maybe we can change some of this stuff and make it seem more based in science, or give it a little more depth. And so I pitched that. I pitched the sort of the source of the demons. I pitched again a larger backstory that never made it into the movie, in terms of where the portal actually was, where the story was taking place. None of that ended up in the movie, but yeah, my idea at the time was maybe we can change some of this stuff and it would make it more interesting. I look back now and I think I understood pretty quickly even then that maybe that was a bad idea. It's so hard to tell with this stuff because you're trying to appeal to an audience that extends beyond the gamers, right? For any film to succeed, it has to appeal to more than just Barbie fans, right? As an example. Yeah. But at the same time, you do want the core audience happy because they're the ones who got you there and they're the ones who care the most. And I don't really ever know what the right answer is in terms of that balance, but I do know that there was a lot of pushback on some of those decisions that we made. And yeah, I don't know. I probably wouldn't again that way, but at the time, my mid-20s self thought it was a brilliant idea. So unfortunately, that's what happened.
Well, at that time, there had been, I think, more or less a decade of video game movies, a number of adaptations of video games. Did you follow all the other films? Did you study them to see what they did with the source material to sort of learn from that?
No, I mean, you've covered this very well actually on your podcast, so your listeners will know, and obviously you know, Christian, that the video game movies that had been made up until that point had not been particularly successful, really critically or commercially. And I was a big fan of Mortal Kombat, the game and the movie, which ended up coming back into my life later. But other than that, I didn't have much of a relationship with many of the adaptations of video games that had been made. And, you know, even the ones that had been made, I didn't feel at the time. And honestly, I still don't feel like the code had been cracked in terms of how do you correctly adapt these things. And the truth is, I think we now understand that there is no secret method. There's no formula to adapting these because the games are all different. Video games are such a wider scope of storytelling and gameplay than movies could ever achieve. And so the difference between Doom and Grand Theft Auto and The Last of Us, completely different mediums, but they are all video games. And so I don't really think of it as lessons to be learned from how to adapt the games that came before it. To me, it was just how do we tell the best story that is honest to the title Doom.
I guess the main problem with adapting a video game is always that it's such a different medium that you experience things yourself in a game. It's like it's happening to you, whereas in a movie, it's sort of happening to someone else, right? I remember the Roger Ebert review where he said that, well, I've never played Doom, but now I know what it feels like not to play it.
That's great. I mean, yes, that's exactly right. Especially in these early days of Doom and No Brothers and Wing Commander and Mortal Kombat, all those movies, I don't think we had understood yet that we were always going to be missing the core element of video games, which was interface and interaction. And so that's a really hard thing to replicate. And especially with a game like Doom, which I would say has like the most interaction you could possibly have with a video game because you are the character. It's your literal first person perspective. Yeah, it's a really hard thing to capture. And I think the best you can do is tell a story that feels like it's inside of the world of Doom, but it will never replicate the game. I think we all do know that now.
Did you do any other research when you were writing the script, like for the scientific parts or for the military parts, like the special unit, that kind of thing?
I'm sure that I did, though I don't remember specifically. I have always been pretty interested in making sure that what I write is sounds or reads or looks real in terms of when I'm referencing, as you said, like the way that the military might operate. And that's an easier one because it's usually pretty easy in Hollywood to get access to the military and have them kind of walk you through some scenarios. But yeah, my dad, my father is now retired, but he was an emergency physician at the time. So I do remember asking him a lot of very strange questions about physiology and the way that the human body works. So I'm sure I did quite a bit of research.
There's an like a post from a gamer online who says that you contacted him online about some of the deathmatch, just the terminology of it, and just trying to get the right for the dialogue, just the right sort of language that people
Yeah,
would use for that.
I, that's cool. I mean, I hope I was nice to him. Yeah, I mean, I was definitely aware at the time that though I was familiar with Doom, there was no amount of play. I could have started playing the day I got hired, and I would never catch up to the level of understanding of that game that some of the great fans had. And so that doesn't surprise me that I was reaching out in that way. I hope he enjoyed that interaction. You know what I do remember is, you know, Doom was obviously a series of games, but there was a bit of an extended universe around it at that time. And I don't know how that has grown or not grown, but there was, I want to say it was a comic book or some sort of printed material that had become fairly famous inside of the Doom community because it had the character screaming slash kill or something very aggressive and weird and didn't sound like something that a person would say. And I remember seeing it on a lot of those forums, like this reference to this sort of silly meme. And I wrote that into the movie and it was immediately taken out. But I was trying to let the producers know, like, no, this is a joke for the fans. They will get it even if you don't. But I didn't get away with that one.
So at which point did Enda McCallion, the original director of the film, come into play, and how was your interaction with him?
I'm so interested to hear about your conversation with Enda. I have a really fond memory of Enda. I don't remember exact dates or moments, but I think Enda came in when I was still working on the movie initially, before I came back onto it when I was still the first writer. I think I might be wrong. He might have come in while I was gone. Um, but Enda at the time was this up and coming commercial director, and that, you know, you could have an incredible career making very interesting commercials and music videos. That's how directors were coming up at the time, and so he was sort of one of the rising stars of that world. So it was really exciting that he had signed on to the movie, and we got along great, is my memory. I hope he agrees. We, you know, Enda is a bit of an eccentric guy, or he was at that time, and we just sort of felt a little bit. Both of us felt a little bit like, you know, black sheep in Hollywood, maybe a little bit. So, and I don't know how old he was, but he felt pretty young to me at the time compared to some of the directors I had met. So I was really excited to work with him. I remember him having the same vision for the film that I did, at least in terms of tone, in terms of the darkness, in terms of the horror element. We both really wanted to make like some pretty grimy, dirty sci-fi. I think, again, he may have told you something different, but that's my memory of it. And I really enjoyed working with him. I had a really good time, and I thought he was going to make a great movie. And I assume we worked together on several drafts, and then he went off to Prague to prep the movie. That's where they shot, in Prague. And I stayed in Los Angeles, working on some other stuff. And maybe you can tell me. I don't know what happened, other than I got a phone call that Enda was not going to direct the movie, and this was pretty close to production, and that they were in search of a new director, and it needed to be somebody with an EU passport because that's how close to production they were. They needed somebody that could get there quickly, and I believe that Dwayne The Rock might have had approval at that point, which sounds early, but I believe he had to approve whoever came in, and he approved Andrzej, and Andrzej came in, and Andrzej Bartkowiak obviously directed the film. So I believe I've seen Enda once since then. I think I ran into him at a restaurant in Los Angeles like many years later and was happy to see him, but I don't know what happened there, but I think he would have made a very different movie than Andrzej ended up making, to be honest. And I always do wonder what that movie would have looked like.
Yeah, me too. I mean, he told me a little bit about his sort of like the more provocative ideas that he had for the movie, and that apparently people at Universal quickly got cold feet and sort of thought it was too out there, that the more extreme stuff that he wanted to do. But also he told me that he was really partying a lot and missing the early production meetings, so he's calling himself irresponsible. um,
I
yeah.
I I wasn't there. People whispered, but I didn't know, and you never know with these situations. I mean, I will say that he definitely had a mind for more extreme ideas in terms of what he wanted to put on screen, and I don't think it would have been anything that would have been inappropriate, but he was definitely leaning more towards horror and blood and gore, and which, to be honest, I think is totally appropriate for the title. So I am curious that Universal started getting cold feet and weren't sure for sure true, because I don't know if he told you this. Here's a good tidbit. Me and Enda and one of the producers desperately wanted Universal to hire Tom Hardy in the lead. Did you know? Did he tell you that?
Mm-hmm. No, no.
Yeah. So Tom Hardy had done the Star Trek movie, and he had done
Mm-hmm.
smaller roles in a couple things, but he was not a household name by any stretch. He was an unknown British actor, essentially, or a vaguely known British actor. He did a screen test for the role of John, for the role that Carl Urban ended up in. And we were all so excited about him because easy to say now, but Tom Hardy's a very good actor. And we
Mm-hmm.
saw that he could bring something really excellent to that role. And Universal just absolutely would not hire him. They were very adamant that he wasn't going to work for them. That I don't know if it was a matter of him not being a quote unquote big enough star or something else that we didn't know about. But we got to hang out with Tom a number of times during that process, and he was lovely. And I do still think would have been, I don't know if I want to say better or worse than Carl, but a different idea. And mostly I just say it just to show that there was a lot of nervousness on Universal's part in terms of
Mm-hmm.
allowing Enda and the rest of the creative team to make every decision that we wanted to make.
Mm-hmm. I see. Yeah. Yeah. From what I gather from talking to Enda, he was really very very willing to fight for all the stuff that he believed in, but he was sort of not picking his battles, so to speak, that
Mm.
he was really fighting for a lot of things that he wanted to do, and then combined with him missing the production meetings that quickly ended. And
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean that it's one of those things because we were both pretty young. I mean, all of us were young. Even Lorenzo, he wasn't young, but he was younger. We were all kind of operating from a bit of a rebellious attitude at the time, and then I just because we had never done it at that level, and we didn't. I would say the same thing for me. I fought back a lot. I mouthed off a lot. I learned a lot of lessons on that movie and in the press release process and in the media and then with the release afterwards. And luckily for me, I made it through and came out on the other side and didn't.
Mm.
It's a lot. It's a lot to put on somebody's plate to these big studio movies, and you just want it to be great. You want to fight for everything, and you realize at some point that, like you said, you have to pick your fight.
Yeah, it would have been interesting to see his take, especially since I think that Doom really has that rebellious spirit. Doom has a sort of punk rock quality to it as a
Mm-hmm.
game. There is something really out there and outlandish about the game, the ultra violence, um, that kind of thing. And so it would have been great to see the movie go into that direction to explore it more. Do you remember some of the things that you talked about, some of the more extreme stuff that you wanted to put in there that didn't end up in the film?
Again, I don't remember specifics at this point, other than um, one thing I do well as a writer, for better or for worse, is I'm very good at describing violence and gore, which is it is it's fine, but not really the type of writing I've evolved into. So that's interesting. But yeah, I guess I would just say I just remember that I really wanted to push the envelope in terms of I wasn't looking to write something disgusting that would turn people off. But again, Doom is scary because really really bad things happen to people in that game, and that game, as you said, is very rebellious, and at the time was like, I think now we would look at Doom as almost quaint because of the level of extremity that
Mhm.
so much of our storytelling has taken on, and the internet has changed everything in terms of what people can see day to day. But my memory
Mhm.
of Doom as a game was that at the time it was like fairly horrifying, and certain types of people were very scared of it, and it caused a bit of an uproar, and it was almost like the game that was too dangerous for young people, you know. And
Mm.
so I just know that me and Enda really, really wanted to lean into that. We wanted it to be dark. We wanted it to be scary. I don't know that Alien is the best comp in terms of storytelling, but the feeling of Alien where everything feels like it's dripping, if that makes sense. You know, it's sort of like everything feels kind of gross, and there's blood dripping down the walls, and there's saliva. I mean, everything, we wanted everything to feel really uncomfortable, just like you felt when you were playing the game.
Yeah, and Alien or Aliens is an
Yeah.
apt comparison, of course, because it also has that kind of, the group that goes into a secluded area to
Mm-hmm.
deal with some sort of threat. You mentioned the when the film was done, the whole press circuit, and I remember that you put out a sort of open letter at some point where you sort of to try to clarify that it's not a direct adaptation of the film, a direct adaptation of the game, but more something that was in the same universe. Do you remember that letter?
I remember it very well. It was maybe the most important lesson I've ever learned as a screenwriter. Uh, yeah, I really regret doing that. I wrote that letter. Again, I'm trying to put myself back into that headspace, and I might be wrong about this, but my memory of it is that I wrote that letter feeling a little defensive about some of what people were starting to say online and expecting of the movie. There was some press already out there about maybe the movie wasn't going to be any good, or I don't know if maybe images had gone online or if there was a trailer yet or something like that. But I feel like I was responding to some sort of pushback that I was feeling, and maybe that was just my young, wounded, pathetic ego. But I felt at the time like I need to protect myself here and let everybody know I did a good job. And if you don't like
Mhm.
it, it's because of X, Y, and Z. It's because of other people's choices or expectations or whatnot. And I have to say, I knew almost instantly that that was an incredibly immature, selfish thing to do, and I was very um, uh, embarrassed at having done it. I learned in
Mhm.
that moment that once you put something on the internet, you can't just take it down, because that went out quick and it got everywhere quickly. And some of the other people involved with the movie weren't very happy with. I think it definitely felt to a lot of people like I was throwing other people under the bus and not being part of the
Mhm.
team who had put this movie together. And yeah, so I do remember that very well. So it's a really humiliating thing that I did, and I will apologize now for any if there's anybody listening that was hurt or offended or surprised by it. I was in my mid 20s, and I was, impetuous and selfish, and I'm not just saying that. After that happened, I went on like a very deep dive in terms of looking inward and trying to figure out how do I want to interact with this world of screenwriting as an artist.
Well, I think in terms of the tone of that message that you sent out, I think still you said that there are a lot of people working on that movie who are trying to make a good movie and trying to make it the best movie they can, and I think that's a sentiment that I can totally get behind. That's something that is true for every movie, right? I mean, nobody ever sets out to make a bad movie. So I think in
Yeah.
terms of tone, it wasn't really something to be embarrassed about. It was just interesting that you were sort of talking to the fans online, because that doesn't really happen all that often.
Oh, okay. Well, good. Maybe it's, as with everything that we all live as humans, maybe it was more embarrassing to me, or I thought more about, and that part of it I obviously do agree with. That was the first movie set I had ever been on, and to see all of these people, most of whom are not famous and will never get working so hard to make a movie, it really opened my eyes and helped
Hmm.
me understand, when you see a movie in the movie theater, it's 2 hours of your life, but hundreds and hundreds of people spent years doing the results is the truth. And I'm sure
Hmm.
most movie fans know that and understand that now. But it was a good lesson.
It's interesting because the writer and director of the second Doom movie, I don't know if you've seen it, the
I
Doom
haven't.
Annihilation. Tony Giglio. It was done by one of Universal's smaller companies,
Hmm.
1440 Films,
Yeah.
on a very low budget, but I think it's a good adaptation.
Oh.
And he really commented a lot on the movie on Twitter when people posted about the film and, sort of were not just reviewing the film, but offering their critique or saying, hey, the movie sucked, or hey, I really like that movie. He really responded to that a lot and always trying to put that into perspective, saying, hey, it's okay if you don't like it, but, there were a lot of people who were really trying to put forward their best effort. And so I thought it was kind of interesting that on both Doom movies, you have, people reacting to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting to hear. And I should watch that movie. I remember the trailer for it. I remember it was coming out and I was pretty interested, and I just didn't have a chance to check it out. I mean, what I would say is I do think it's always good when the people involved in making movies are passionate about the movies that they're making and they want to defend the
Mm-hmm.
work and they want to stand up for the people that they've spent time working with. So that's cool to hear that he felt that way. My experience of it was, I mean, not that anybody should bother even attempting to find me or my interactions online, but you will notice if you do a complete drop off from my willingness to interact with message boards and fan bases. Not that I don't want to interact with them, but you won't quite the same way I did with that letter because I felt like I had made a mistake, and so my response to it was, I'm going to withdraw. I'm going to do the work, and people can react to it how they want. And maybe the director, the actors, or the people who are usually more out there, they can speak for the film if they want. And if people really want to talk to me, I'll do Q&As and I'll do interviews and I'll do film festivals sometimes. But generally, it has made me a little bit more gun shy because maybe this is
Mm-hmm.
just the insecure writer in me. But I always just think, oh boy, I mean, all I can do is say something stupid. I mean, even this interview, Christian, like I don't do a lot of podcasts, and I was very nervous because I was like, oh man, I'm gonna be an idiot. But I really appreciate that you are doing this, and I thought it was so cool that you had managed to get a hold of Enda. So I'm very glad I've done it.
Yeah, and I totally appreciate you doing this. Um, did you follow the like the reception of the movie at all? Did you read the reviews? Did you um
No, I don't.
react to that?
I am always it's very hard in the internet era to not be generally aware of how something's being received. So I don't have to be looking at individual reviews to know that like people like it or don't like it, and that's very binary. But I I've never read reviews. There was maybe some of the smaller, more independent movies I did. I felt more connected to at the end, and I read some of those reviews.
Hmm.
But with Doom, I didn't read reviews. I was aware that it wasn't performing particularly well, and that hurt. And so I think that made me even less likely to further read reviews. The review that you just cited from Ebert, I had never heard that. That's really funny. But that's actually a part of the process for me, and it has always been, starting with Doom and all the way through. The last movie I wrote was Across the Spider-Verse. I don't read reviews for that either. The way I look at it is it doesn't change the work that I did. I I try really, really hard to write great material and to keep people happy and to be worth the money that is spent on me. And my
Mm.
product is the script, and then that product goes out to all these other artisans, and then they do their job, and I've already done my job. So then the director comes in, and then the actors have to come in and interpret the words, and the movie ends up being a different product than the one I started with. And that's just now what I understand to be part
Mm.
of the screenwriting process. And so, all of which is to say, I don't really associate the end result of a film, good or bad, with all of the work I put in. Obviously, it's related, but I don't
Mm.
I don't take any real credit for Across the Spider-Verse, and I'm not beating myself up over Doom.
So did any of the things that you went through on Doom, that you learned on Doom, on the adaptation process and everything, did any of that come into play when you did the other video game adaptation, when you worked on Mortal Kombat?
I probably I probably should have learned more lessons than I did on Mortal Kombat. Was also try to get a little too creative. Although, there was one major difference, two major differences. Mortal Kombat, I think I said earlier, I'm a huge fan of Paul W.S. Anderson's Mortal Kombat. I love that movie. That movie I
Mm.
saw 3 times on opening day, me and my brother, when we were
Wow.
teenagers. I love the music. It's still like a very core memory. I can watch it back now. Of course, that there are elements look a little more dated, and that some of it is more soap opera-y than what a modern version of that movie might look like. But I stand by that movie to this day. And so there was an existing version of the attempt at making a movie that already existed when I came in on
Mm.
the new Mortal Kombat. So that's, I think, could be an advantage because you could learn from how they did it. I guess it could also be a disadvantage because I think what we were trying to do with Mortal Kombat, the newer Mortal Kombat, was separate a little bit from that original movie and
Mm.
tonally. And I don't know. I don't know how people responded to that, but when I look back at it, I think maybe it could have used a little bit more levity. And then the other element that's different is on Mortal Kombat, I was brought in, and there were a number of existing scripts that had been written before I came in, and
Mm.
so there was like a bunch of storytelling that was in place that I was told pretty specifically I was not to mess with. So the idea,
Mm.
this idea that was invented for the film of arcana and sort of having some sort of magic within you kind of idea, and the idea that the lead character would be a character that had not been previously seen in games. Those things existed before I came into that project. So in
Mm.
that example, there was a lot of the road had already been paved, and I was just there to work out some of the structural stuff around those ideas. So less opportunity to learn lessons and to take the lessons I had from Doom because I wasn't the first writer in, I would say. So on Mortal Kombat, it was really just about fleshing characters out and working with what I had been given and making it all make sense on the page.
Mm.
And I'm not sure if I did that well.
What about the tone of Mortal Kombat, the humor in the script? Was that brought in by you, or was that something that was already in place?
It wasn't in place because we took some of those ideas and then basically started writing fresh with some of the core ideas in mind.
Mm.
So jokes and specific dialogue wasn't intact. But I don't remember writing that movie with a particularly comedic tone in mind, which is I remember that because my career has evolved to a place where I prefer to write a more comedic action movie. It's just more fun for me.
Mm.
It can get kind of dark and dreary to write very serious, violent action that has no levity at all. Just as an internal process, it can be dark, and so I would have remembered. I think if I had been having more quote unquote fun writing Mortal Kombat, I was writing Mortal Kombat right around the same time that I was writing Zombieland 2. Uh, um,
Mm-hmm.
which was like the exact opposite. That's sort of like there are no rules. Be as crazy as you want. And so my version of Mortal Kombat, I think, was a little more self-serious. So if the final product um, has some levity in it, and if there's stuff that people enjoy in that regard, that probably came from Greg, the writer who came in after me, or maybe the director, or maybe the actors. I don't know, but unfortunately, not
Mm-hmm.
me. I'd like to tell you it was me, but it was not.
It's interesting because I think both films sort of lend itself to a comparison just because of the game material. I mean, Mortal Kombat also was something that was ultra violent and something that, had parents worried and something that didn't really have a lot of story in it.
Yeah, right.
And so I think a lot of the stuff that Mortal Kombat does is something that I think the Doom movie could have used, and just in terms of the more outlandish concepts, like the Mortal Kombat film has those elements, like the head crushing scene or stuff like that. Really, the over the top stuff.
It's funny that you point this out because the truth is I'm not a big fan of on-screen violence. I
Mm-hmm.
like action movie, like grounded action movies that can get kind of violent, like Heat maybe, or Sicario's pretty violent at times.
Mm-hmm.
But with science fiction and horror, I'm actually pretty allergic to violence on screen. It kind of grosses me out. It freaks me out. So I had never interrogated this, but I don't know why it is that those are because I've been offered many video game adaptations along the way, and
Mm-hmm.
you're right. Those are almost certainly the two games that are most famous for violence, at least for a period of time. I don't know what it is about them that drew me, but
I'm the same actually, and I'm also kind of curious what it was about those games that kind of made them so, I don't know, not just addictive, but that really, drew you into their world and really sort of pushed all the right buttons that you were really enjoying this. Like neither Mortal Kombat nor Doom would be the same without that kind of over the top violence. And
yeah,
yeah.
with Mortal Kombat, I've always been attracted to the idea of how different all of these combatants are, and visually and stylistically. That's always a fun idea. I mean, I love blood sport. So,
Hmm.
more and Mortal Kombat obviously owes a lot to blood sport. So that sort of story and that sort of gameplay is exciting to me. Doom is more insular. So I can't. Maybe I was the wrong person. Now that I'm thinking about it, maybe I was probably a bad idea for them to hire me. I apologize to everybody. I never want to tell people not to hire me, but I mean, I will say I don't write horror usually, and Doom is probably as close as I ever came because I thought that could be
Mhm.
sci-fi horror, and that was what I was aiming for. But yeah, maybe I don't know, maybe don't bring me your horror movies. I'm probably not the good writer for them. Someday I will be.
Well, I mean, you did horror at least on some level with Horseman and Telltale, so there is that element in your work, but it's a more early, like the earlier scripts that you
Yeah,
did,
yeah.
and then it became more comedic at some point.
Yeah, I like gothic horror and I like baroque and romantic horror and tension, and I like scary. What I don't Friday the 13th or slasher
Mm.
movies. I don't have an appreciation for either traditional horror or modern horror.
Hmm.
Psychological horror I'm pretty excited about, and thrillers that kind of can sort of touch into horror. I like those quite a bit, but yeah, I'm a very soft guy, and I don't think I can handle too much gore on screen, despite writing it frequently.
I don't know. Maybe that's the quote that we're gonna use.
I
You know,
mean, it's on record.
the,
Can I ask you a question?
sure.
My question is, do people like Doom? And I asked that. That sounds like a very silly question, but I'm asking because when the movie came out, it did not perform very well financially. I think that's a matter
Hmm.
of record, and I don't believe that it performed very well critically. And that was felt bad, but it was a thing I had to move on from. Years ago, several years ago, after Shang-Chi came out, I spoke at a film festival at a college campus. And a bunch of kids
Hmm.
came up to me afterwards, and I thought they were going to want to talk to me about Marvel. And all they wanted to talk to me about was Doom. And these were kids that
Wow.
were like barely alive when the movie came out. And they were asking me all these questions about Doom. And I was like, you guys know Doom? And this one kid, I'll never forget, goes, yeah, man, Doom slaps. And I said, it does? And we spent a half hour talking about it, and I've always wondered if that was just that small group of people, or if it has taken on a second life with new fans, or if it's maybe seen as kitsch now, or I don't know. Do you have a sense of that, Christian, of where it lives in the culture now, if it lives at all?
Hmm. Yeah, it's hard to tell. I mean, you were right. The reviews were all really terrible, but they were terrible for all the video game adaptations.
Sure.
And I mean, that's, just generally for a lot of stuff that comes out of Hollywood. You get a ton of terrible reviews. So like that doesn't really have a lot of weight. Um, I don't remember a lot of people really liking the movie back when it came out, and I think more people like it now.
Hmm.
And maybe they find it through The Rock, which is possible, and it's kind of interesting when you watch it now. I mean, it's such a different character these days. you see the old movie, and he's not yet that genial, funny guy, but he's a very serious and tough guy, and he turns out to be the bad guy. So that's an interesting experience, I think. I think Doom is something that still, I mean, there have been so many sequels and remakes and everything of Doom, so that's something that's very much still alive. So I think that's why, people go back. And I think with all the different iterations of Doom that have come out, I think somehow the movie almost makes more sense in that context than when it first came out. Because I remember when it first came out, I mean, I knew the first two Doom movies, and it didn't really feel like the first two Doom movies, like the first two Doom games. It sort of felt more like the third one. But now, I mean, the newer games have really focused on that horror element more, and they have really, gone more on went deeper into the atmosphere of it, just the darkness and everything. And so I guess that kind of makes more sense to people. So I think the reaction is more positive these days, than back then. Yeah.
I think that's really astute. I think that's really smart, Christian, that there's more Doom out there now. And so this thing can live on its own as just a thing that maybe wasn't exactly like the first two games, but with more context around it, it can just be allowed to live, versus we were just held up right against those games when we came out. And now you've got these great soundtracks and all these other games. And that's interesting. Yeah, I've just been super curious. I don't know if you know Alamo Drafthouse, which is a movie chain here in the States, that they're very genre based and big, real movie fans love them. And they did a screening of Doom here in LA last year, and I thought,
wow,
oh, interesting. I mean, again, just I don't know what to make of any of it. I'm an observer at this point in my life, just like anybody else would be. But I thought, wow, I mean, it wouldn't be doing that if they didn't anticipate selling tickets. So I don't know. I'm always curious to watch the evolution of it, and I think you're right about The Rock too. I mean, that's been an interesting evolution as well. And I'm sure but like the most devastating thing that ever happened to that movie was when many years after the release of the movie, The Rock made a joke about it at the WWE Hall of Fame ceremony when he was making fun of John Cena. And we've all moved on, but it's really fun to look back and look at what we were all doing at the time. And he was so young. I think Dwayne is very good in me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very interesting I mean, just Carl Urban and The Rock, I think that's a good pairing. Just to have the two of them play off each other, and then really have that serious tone of The Rock, which I mean, he's such an impressive, in terms of the physical appearance, right? I mean, he's such an intimidating guy, and to have that seriousness go along with that, I mean, that's really a strong presence in the movie. So
it's very cool. And if what's funny is it's actually the closest thing he's done to it since then is what he did at WrestleMania this year. Again, if you don't watch wrestling, but he has recently sort of come back into the bad guy role in wrestling, and what he's doing is very very mean, and that's been doing in most of his movies. And so I think you can see a little bit of it in Doom, and that's also fun to sort of see how we've all moved forward. Carl and Rosamund Pike obviously has gone on to a great career. And it was the first movie that Lorenzo produced, and Lorenzo has gone on to a legendary career as a producer, producing the Transformers movies among many others. So maybe it was obviously something that really taught all of us a lot. And I'm obviously very grateful for it.
Yeah, definitely. Did you go to that the screening at the Alamo Drafthouse?
I did. Yes, I did.
Okay, so how was the reaction to the film?
I couldn't tell. It was people were enjoying it. They were laughing at times, which at times in the moment we had not planned to be funny, obviously, but sometimes movies age that way, and I also can laugh at certain things that don't work in that movie now. The technology was different, the filmmaking style was different. It's I will say it personally, it's always really hard for me to watch any movie that I worked on, even the ones that critics and crowds might say this is excellent. All I tend to see is the stuff, oh, that scene was supposed to be like this, or that funny thing happened that day and the actor wasn't able to be there. I always just see the things that didn't work out, and that's just, I think pretty typical of an artist, reflecting on the work that they did. So it's really hard for me, even Doom now, to watch that movie and just take it for what it is. So I was mostly watching for other people's reactions rather than trying to have my own opinion of the film. And people were having fun for sure, and that was cool to watch, because I don't remember people having fun the first time I saw it in a crowd.
No, it's good. I think, well, it's getting rediscovered maybe in a way. And yeah, people are developing a sort of different approach maybe to it, and maybe see just a little bit more of the humor of it, or don't take it as seriously. And there's less of a backlash against all the video game adaptations at this point.
Yeah.
Because it's happening to other video game adaptations too, that, were totally just, were not successful and had terrible reviews, and everybody was sort of dismissing them when they came out. And nowadays people are sort of going back to them and saying, oh, hey, that wasn't so bad. And, there's something in that movie. I mean, Super Mario being the most famous example of that, of course, but I think it's happened to other movies as well.
No, that's good. I mean, I think that's healthy. Ultimately, these things are made at a certain moment in time, and they have to live inside of the expectations of that moment, but they grow as time goes on, and our experiences with them, and new fans come into them. I mean, that's sort of the cool thing about art, is it changes over time, even though it's static. In this case, the movie hasn't changed, but the world around it has changed, the expectations have changed, and that makes me happy to hear that people are loving the Super Mario movie. And I think there's room for all of it. And I hope in the future, if I were to adapt another video game, which I don't currently plan to, but you never know, I hope that it is received in the moment better than Doom was. But if it's not, I hope that people will find it down the line in the same way that you're describing. I think that's really nice.